Damn non-voting members.
Yeah.
Fix this.
There's only 3 voting members? Is Julie, not Julie, Lisa?
I haven't heard anything.
I don't know. Okay.
Maybe I should.
Where's Mummy?
Mummy is virtual.
She's virtual too.
Hi, Mummy.
There she is. I see her.
Hi, y'all. How's it going?
Hey.
How are you?
Good.
Good, how you
Good.
doing?
Good. Sorry, I'm not with y'all in person. Had to get back so that I could pick up the baby from daycare.
Oh, great. Wow, the real-time transcription, that's pretty cool. Has that always been there?
Yeah, normally I hide it though because it is a little jarring on the side. And because it's
We
coming
have
through these
special
microphones, it says
feeds.
everything is me.
We're supposed to,
speaking,
but
so sometimes it's
Okay.
good if I go back to like pull a quote or it knows out that it may
Uh-huh.
not
in the
be.
next meeting, which
Specific to
everyone has to
person.
get.
Yeah,
We're gonna-
yeah.
But it is pretty
Is it
cool.
this month?
And if it's an
Yeah.
all virtual meeting, it's pretty helpful
Okay.
going back and
I
getting
I
it.
introduced a new snack today, so I'm waiting to receive reviews on it.
Is it the Chex Mix Bagel Chip?
No, the organic ones in the bag on the back there.
I
Fancy.
tried it.
Still waiting.
They don't raise it.
Let me know how they are.
I guess if you're ready, Julie.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll do attendance. Commissioner Montgomery.
Here.
Commissioner McCullough. Virtual. Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Miller. Here. Commissioner Evans here. Commissioner Ortiz. Absent. Commissioner Dean. Commissioner Cesario. All right. We also can't vote on the meeting minutes. So we'll jump into the investigations update. Mummy, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. I'm not sure if we're actually going to be able to do this piece of the agenda either. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because the idea was to go through the investigations protocol and then vote to adopt it. And since we don't have a physical quorum to do that, it might make sense to, and then also just I think in terms of if people have questions, the more people we have, the better, to either wait till the end of the meeting to do this piece if we are expecting more people to come enough to meet a physical quorum, or to do it at the beginning of the next meeting. The document is posted online and also in everyone's email. So if we don't talk about it today, people would still review it and just familiarize themselves with it. And then we could do it at the top of our next meeting, which is when I expect that we possibly may take our first investigation up.
We may need to bump that to the beginning of the next meeting. I just texted Gary. I know he said he might be able to make it late, but I haven't heard from him.
Okay.
I know Martine won't be here, and I texted Lisa also. So we'll go through the other updates. They're not terribly substantial, so we could have a short meeting, but we'll save that to the end and see if Lisa and Gary join us.
Okay, that sounds good. Generally speaking, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, please.
I was just gonna say that I wanted to make sure that folks knew and are able to access Axon, are able to access the Excel spreadsheet, are able to also access Power DMS. So if anybody has had any issues doing that, I think at this point we've probably had briefings with everyone except maybe Martine, Lisa, and Jim. Oh, so that's about half. So half have done it and half have not. The ones that I have had briefings with already, I usually walk them through at the beginning of the meeting how to access those things. But if anybody else is having any issues, please feel free to reach out, and I will definitely schedule time to walk you through and show you exactly how to access everything. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to mention was that in addition to the investigations protocol, which is just kind of how we would go through working through and talking through an investigation during the meeting, the other document that you all asked for and I wanted to follow up on was regarding the parameters in terms of any sort of information that you should be mindful of when you're discussing these cases to discuss or not to discuss. So I've reached out to outside counsel to see if she could put together kind of a legal one-page briefing type of thing. So you'll have that as a tool and a resource to use as you kind of navigate this new space of going into doing investigations. I am hoping to give you all my first report by the end of this week, which will then give you roughly about a month, maybe a little bit less till your next meeting. But both briefings have been done on that investigation. And so so long as the two investigation leads on that case are ready to go, then we're hoping that possibly at our next meeting, we'd be taking up the first investigation for you all to discuss.
Thank you. I'll just take a minute since we have some time to also say we requested an extension for our report for 2 reasons. I had a kind of personal unexpected incident, but also without having processed any of the investigations, we felt like it would be more substantive to the community to get a report at the end of the year that incorporates a full year of our operations and summarizes some of the completed investigations that we'll clear out in October and November. So that gives us a little bit more opportunity to provide insight into what the work looks like as we all get that ourselves. Are there any questions or kind of thoughts about the
Is it the end of the
investigations?
year? Or
Yeah.
the end of the month?
At the end of the year.
Okay.
Because we'll do one in October, which I think will help us like burn in our conversational protocol and our review
Yeah.
and then the report outs. But then in November, we may be able to
One or two.
get a couple
Yeah.
other ones
That makes a
done.
lot of sense.
Do we have a theme this year, Julie, for our report? Last year was readiness and training. This year is MOU establishment, I assume, and
Operations and outreach. Did you went to the Green Valley?
This
tomorrow.
Oh, it's tomorrow.
Or
Okay.
It's this Saturday.
Right,
Okay.
but yeah, I will.
Wonderful. I'm happy to chat with you about that before.
Okay.
So then Gary is working on outreach with the other civic associations so that in November we can go to a couple more civic association meetings, like informally with one person and Mummy, just to have some of those conversations. So that will also be some of our report input on just like how those outreach activities go and where there's engagement and where there's interest or concern. Yeah. Okay. Then let's go to budget.
Yes. Oh, and one other update I wanted to give was that we tried out a kind of different model for one of our current investigations that Anika and Julie are assigned to, where we were able to release some of the information, I think most of the information prior to when we normally do now, which is at the conclusion of the OPR IPA section of or portion of the investigation. And so we released some of that kind of before the initial briefing. And then we had an hour-long briefing. And then Captain Kim from OPR joined us for the second half of the briefing. And that enabled the COB members to have had an opportunity to have looked at the complaint, the body-worn camera footage, and then also ask any questions or engage in discussion or dialogue with OPR about the investigation. And I thought that it went pretty well. We are doing it right now, not for every single one, but particularly ones that may be a little bit more complicated or may raise some kind of like larger policy discussions, just to kind of see how it goes and how beneficial it is and how efficient it is. And then I think after we've done a few of them, we'll be able to kind of create a little bit of a formula, if you will, for which ones we're going to do that kind of full-scale briefing and release information preliminarily, or which ones are a little bit more straightforward where we can release all that information in like one complete package. I don't know if you had any comments about it, Julie or Nika, just about the process generally, not specifically about the investigation.
Now, after we do the process, what do we do next as far as, because it feels like, it's just, I'm like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Like,
So-
do we have to get together to write a report?
When we get the reports, or when we get the reports from the IPA and from OPR, we'll put together a discussion protocol for the group that says, what are kind of a summary of the description, identifying what the key questions are, reflecting on the report recommendations, and then we'll facilitate discussion so that we can vote on whether or not we agree with the recommendations.
Okay.
So we will, you and I won't be the first one. So you'll have a template, or
Oh,
like you'll be
gotcha.
able to see what we're putting together that comes to this group. I can't remember if it's Charles and I are the first one or Gary and I. But
Yes.
we'll have a sample so that we're not like crafting it from scratch all the time. It will be
Okay.
pretty simplistic. Part of what we have to grapple with is anonymizing all of the parties involved, since we have to discuss it in an open.
Yeah, and I think as we move forward, the process will be a lot more synchronized and a little bit faster. Remember that we are still kind of like working, and we're kind of like on the tail end now of working our way out of a little bit of a backlog because we were still operationalizing the video equipment. And so after the briefing that we did, then we did the interview with the involved officers. And then the next thing that will happen is once OPR finishes their report and you all have all of the information related to the case, you'll get a closing debrief, and you'll also get a copy of my report as well. So at that point, we'll be able to kind of talk about, what the outcome of the investigation was, and then you all can use that opportunity to start putting together your discussion plan, your discussion guide about what you want to discuss related to the case, what issues you want to highlight when it's your turn to kind of facilitate that conversation with the rest of the COB. But typically speaking, that would usually happen a lot closer together. Right now, you just might experience a little bit of a lull. So just to kind of explain that and give some context there, you're not like missing anything. But I will be reaching out to you and Julie soon to do a closing debrief on the one that we did the initial briefing on.
Mummy, will the OPR memo identify what OPR has decided to do with the case?
Yes,
The outcome, it'll have the recommendation.
correct.
Okay.
Is there any?
Lisa isn't joining us this evening. So Lisa isn't joining us this evening.
Okay.
So we won't be able to revisit those, which is fine. But if we want to do budget and outreach, then we can probably.
Just to close out, were there any other questions related to investigations or any thing about the process that you wanted to ask me, or Captain Kim, did you have any comments or any questions?
Yeah, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. And
You can hear me.
I just want to just make one small clarification on that is the OPR document that you all will be looking at will have a finding, but not a recommendation. Recommendations are done through the chain of command. That is something that OPR is not necessarily, I would say this, cursorily involved with. Those recommendations are done through the chain of command to the chief of police, and we sort of facilitate that process. So you will see a finding, but not necessarily a recommendation.
Captain Kim, when you're saying recommendation, are you referring to the discipline or training recommendations, that sort of thing? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clarified.
Yep.
So the
But the
finding is related to the
finding of that-
allegation, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
the allegation finding will be listed there. And those are, exonerated, unfounded, sustained, and not sustained for all the allegations that were listed.
And once you all make that finding, then when you say the chain of command, could you just explain a little bit more to everyone what that means after you make the finding, how it goes back down and then kind of comes back up?
Sure. So
Thank
once
you.
once an OPR investigation has a finding attached to each allegation. That sort of document is passed back down to the chain of command. That is normally done through the section commander. So the section commander, so it would be like, most of the times it would be like a patrol commander would then sit down with his supervisory staff and then formulate the recommendation. And that could be anything from discipline, hours, shift level counseling to a training recommendation, a policy review recommendation. Those are always all on the table when we talk about recommendations or corrective actions for an employee. And so that recommendation is passed back up to the deputy chief level. It's then brought, once it's at the deputy chief level, then it's brought back to OPR for final processing. And then it's presented to the chief as, this is what the chain of command has recommended. There's some questions that are done about consistency. And what I mean by consistency is, for these types of incidents, is this recommendation consistent with what we have done with other employees who have had like or similar instances? And so that is a way for the organization to ensure that there is some fairness that's brought across a broad group of people. And that's where OPR really plays its pivotal role in sort of that recommendation process.
And it's fair to say the COB doesn't have any input into that, right?
The recommendation, no.
So
Right.
how will we be informed of those recommendations in Chief Penn's kind of final?
So I believe the way that the ordinance and the MOU is written is, you all will receive that recommendation if there's discipline attached once the grievance process has been completed. So you all will know what the recommendation was and what sort of the outcome of that investigation was, if there was discipline attached. But we cannot do that until the grievance process has played out, because the grievance process may change what that outcome was, right? So it's kind of like there is a system that is regulated by AR 2.7, and to a certain extent now the collective bargaining agreement through contractual like mediation. There's two tracks to that. Once those processes play out, then it's safe to say that the recommendation and the outcome is basically set. There is no coming back from that, because the appeals process has played its course.
And how long does that typically take? I'm sure it varies as to whether there's
So
or not.
under AR 2.7, that process, depending on if it goes to civil service, should take anywhere between, I say this because, but there are times when it gets extended. Ideally, it's done in less than 30 days. If someone has discipline that under AR 2.7 is grievable, and just so you know, there's a difference in when I say discipline, correct letters of corrective action, and shift level counseling. Those two types of, I guess, recommendations are not grievable. Letters of corrective action and shift level counseling are not grievable under AR 2.7. So those there is no grievance process for that. That's immediately closed out. If there is a suspension that is done, and a suspension could be an hour's forfeiture or a hard, what we refer to as a hard suspension. And, that sort of, that discipline, and I will refer to it as discipline, that's when that grievance process takes place. So if we take hours from an employee or we do a hard suspension, that is a grievable disciplinary action. And that's when that sort of kicks in. Does that answer your question? I don't think I really satisfied your question, because the short answer to that is it really depends. There are people that can get attorneys involved and then do discovery motions, and I'll be deposed by an attorney. And if you've ever gone through that process with depositions and discovery, I think everyone kind of understands that that could be a long and lengthy process.
Yeah, that's a helpful refresh. Thank you for walking back through that. Mummy, do we have in our current tracking spreadsheet, I can't think if we have the like disposition and grievance as part of our tracking. That might be a valuable way for us to process an investigation and then track for that outcome.
Kind of, not quite in that manner. It's tracked based on when the subject officer was interviewed, which is kind of, similarly another timeline that's running here before the grievance period starts, in that once a subject officer is interviewed, there's a 30-day period by which OPR has to finish their investigation. And so that is one part of the timeline that is captured in the investigation spreadsheet. But we could start another column, I suppose, from when the discipline is issued that would then maybe show you how far along we are in the grievance process. It only paints like a portion of that picture at the moment.
That's helpful. I think maybe what we want to do, since now we have the investigation protocol, once we get it voted on and approved since we can't do that tonight, I think we had talked about, like, we had part of a diagram, but we might now, with more familiarity with the steps, add a diagram so that members of the community can kind of track who is responsible for what, where the decision points are, and what the typical timelines or timeline restrictions will be. So I can take the lead on that, and then we can use that in our report as well.
Yeah, there are quite a bit. There's quite a bit of this information is captured in some diagrams in the MOU, and Deputy Chief Chamberlain kind of captured a lot of it. I can't recall if it exactly might say the 30 days on the diagram. I know it's in the body of the MOU, but it kind of captures the flow, the workflow. And if you could use that, I was going to say, as a kind of a basis, and then kind of add the timelines along with it if you wanted to expand on that for timeline purposes. And then also I just wanted to circle back to, and sorry, Captain Kim, to put you kind of in the professor chair a little bit. I just want to make sure that people understand what civil service is and how that plays into the process.
Yeah, so great question. If you go into AR 2.7, and I keep referring to AR 2.7, it stands for Administrative Regulation 2.7, and that is sort of the handbook for all regulations that applies to all Arlington County employees, not just police employees. If you are an employee of the Arlington County government, you are subject to these regulations. Chapter 18 goes over in detail the grievance process. There's step 1, where the employee informs their immediate supervisor. There's a 7-day time period where the employee has to notify their supervisor that they plan to grieve this discipline. Once step 1 is done, then step 2 is a meeting with the chief. And then I believe that has to be within 20 days of the issuance of the discipline. Step 3 is a meeting with the county manager. And at any point of time, like the chief of police or the county manager, they can change the recommendation, or they can change the imposed discipline. The final step of the grievance process really depends on what type of employee you are. You can, if you are a police employee, go to what's called the police trial board. And then your discipline and your incident will be heard by former members of the police department and be heard by that. Most people do not actually elect to do that. Most people go to the Civil Service Commission, and that is available to, I believe, all employees of the Arlington County government system. That hearing will take place, and I don't know, I'd have to refresh my memory about if there's a timeline. I believe it's whenever the employee's attorney gathers all the facts, and whether they have an opportunity to depose witnesses like myself and whoever else was included in this sort of investigation process. And then that sort of plays out in front of a civil service hearing. Once the civil service hearing is done under AR 2.7, there are no more avenues of appeal. So the Civil Service Commission will sort of close that process out. Civil Service Commission I believe, is comprised of individuals that don't necessarily have a police background. There are just regular laypersons that are hearing this case, and they will make a determination whether the grievance, or I'm sorry, whether the imposed discipline is fair, adequate, too much. They can't make it worse, but they can certainly overturn what was done, and they can certainly reduce it. So they have the power to do that.
That's helpful, thank you. Mommy, you're on mute.
One day I'm gonna get that together.
We all
One
are.
follow-up question also, with civil service kind of reviewing these investigations, they will also be looking at the underlying allegations, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I just wanted to point that out as well, because I guess like a layman's way to look at it is kind of like an appellate court. So, and that's something that you want to keep in mind when you're reviewing the investigations, even on the front end. And that's the reason why there are evidentiary standards as it pertains to investigations, right? Like we have to be able to prove something beyond a preponderance of the evidence in order to sustain an allegation. And that is so that the way that the way the allegations are framed, even in terms of like which allegations OPR may choose to go with or not to go with, and sustain or not sustain, are a part of the kind of thought process behind that is, will we have enough to meet that evidentiary standard? Because if you cannot prove a particular allegation beyond a preponderance of the evidence, then it can be it can become an issue when civil service looks at an investigation. Is that an accurate summary, Captain Kim?
Yes, I mean that's a fair description. As you were talking, I'm like pulled up the step 4, which is the appeal to the Civil Service Commission, to make sure that I did not misspeak about how the process works. And it does have some timelines in here, but I can tell you that some of these things play out under mutual agreement. So like timelines, just so you all know, can be extended by, I believe, under almost every step by mutual agreement with both parties. And so if both parties agree to an extension, then it's just extended. Even though it may say 7 days, which is what I'm currently reading right now, I believe there is an avenue for you to get more time if both parties agree. So those things do tend to play out and take a little bit longer. And, I would say that 60 days is a short estimate for something that goes to civil service. And they don't always go to civil service. I don't want people to think that they always go there. Sometimes they're just handled at, step 2 or step 3. But if they do go that route, it is going to be a long time before there is sort of a finding on how this thing is going to play out. That will not change the finding of what the investigation is. I just want to make sure. They can only change the recommendation. The finding will remain intact. They have no authority to change a finding that OPR investigation.
What happens if the COB or Mummy's report has a different view of what the finding should be? How would that, I mean, it hasn't happened, I don't know if it will happen, but how would that be handled? Because would you wait for the grievance process to work that out? Or if the officer said, I want to grieve this right away, and the COB came out with a report that said, well, we agree with this part of the finding, but not this. How would that, I mean, it hasn't happened, but how do you think that would be handled?
So I'm trying to understand the question that you're posing. And I think what you're saying is, and I'd like to use a scenario. So you're saying like OPR says that the allegation is sustained, and the COB is saying that the allegation should be not sustained. So let's use that scenario. Would you like to use that as a scenario?
Okay, sure.
or vice versa, it doesn't matter. So under that scenario where OPR says the allegation is sustained, and let's say the COB says, you know what, that shouldn't have been sustained. The agency will do a recommendation based on the OPR finding, and they will impose that recommendation and let it work itself out through the grievance process. Let's change the scenario where OPR says it's not sustained and the Community Oversight Board says it should be sustained. The agency will impose its recommendation based on the OPR finding, and it will proceed that way. So I guess what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is the OPR finding is what the agency will proceed with the employee. That's under, I believe, the ordinance and how it's written, under the MOU, under AR 27. That is the way that it will play out.
Right, and I mean, it was, clear from the ordinance and all the discussions, and everybody was fully aware that the COB makes recommendations that are not binding. But if the COB made a recommendation, what would the consideration of the recommendation be, right? I mean, the timeframe, because I think there's some value to that in terms of, I'm thinking about talking to the public. And, if we say as part of our outreach to the public, COB can make a recommendation, but nobody's even going to look at it. That doesn't sound very good. And I think, I don't actually know what the process would be, right? I mean, to me, it would
I just want to make sure that everyone understands sort of what this, in my understanding of the COB role, and please, Mummy or Julie, interject if I am misstating, but I believe the COB, as it relates to recommendations in discipline, is sufficiency of discipline, not discipline. So the recommendation the COB makes and what it produces is concerns the sufficiency of the discipline, the adequateness of the investigation, and the timeliness in which it was completed. I believe those are the three buckets in which the COB is sort of charged with looking at when it comes to investigations that involve police employees.
Okay, and so not the finding, is that correct?
That is correct.
I think it's important to kind of break it down into two separate categories with like the findings of the investigation and then any recommended discipline, if that is actually the case, because it's not always the case that there's a recommended discipline. For example, if an allegation is not sustained, there won't be a recommended discipline. So as it pertains to the findings, when you all receive the report from OPR, they will have made their findings. I will have made my findings. You'll be receiving it on, the tail end. And then essentially the role of the COB would be like a checks and balances, if you will, right? Like you would be able to look at both reports, look at the whole investigation, and then issue your findings as a way to kind of, for transparency, for accountability, for this like additional community element of having input, and then explain if you agree or disagree. At that point, you wouldn't necessarily be in a position to change the findings because the findings have already been made, but you, in issuing your findings, are pointing out any sort of discrepancies, promoting transparency, and then the police department would respond in writing if they wanted to those findings. I believe if I understand correctly, as it pertains to the findings, the police department may, and I believe as it pertains to the discipline, they shall. So on the second end of it, and that what I mean by may or shall is just that they may respond to the findings or any discrepancy in the findings, but they shall respond to any sort of disciplinary recommendations or any sort of like discrepancy. And if you all think that the discipline was not sufficient or too harsh or something of that nature. So Chief Penn is required to issue a response to that, I believe within 30 days per the MOU and the ordinance. But I think the reason why it's important to make that distinction is just to finish out the category of the findings, right? That is where, as an oversight agency, and then I'm including myself in that bucket with the COB, we have input during the process vis-a-vis me, as you're kind of think of it as like your proxy. So I'm collaborating in the investigation with Albert, and that's the reason why we do the briefings along the way. Before an investigation is closed out, you have 2 representatives from the COB who have some more involved intel on the investigation, and you all are able to give your feedback regarding the investigation through me, to me, or to Albert, or however you want to provide that feedback to us. But that's designed to give you all some input along the way, so that when you receive the final product, it's not like the first time that you're getting any sort of information related to the investigation.
Right.
That being said, obviously, it's always a recommendation, right? Like neither myself nor the COB has the authority to force OPR to make a certain finding or pursue a certain allegation, but it's the working relationship is that if we have issues, we identify them, we discuss them with OPR, and we've always been able to come up with some sort of resolution or some sort of way to address whatever the issues are. So I just want to make sure to point out that like it is not, even in that process, it is not our role to necessarily, we're not in a role to change the outcome of how OPR is planning to move forward with the investigation. If we think that something is completely missing from the picture, a witness needs to be interviewed, obviously our first mechanism would, or an allegation is not being looked at, our first mechanism would be to communicate that with OPR. And then if for some reason we just are not on the same page, that's where that whole process comes into play in terms of like subpoenaing records or witnesses or conducting kind of a non-concurrent investigation, which has not happened, but that's kind of like how that process would go if that were to happen. But I just want to highlight there is input along the way as it comes to the findings, but again, always at the end of the day, recommendations. Recommendations that I will say, OPR doesn't take lightly, but their recommendations, ultimately, OPR is the agency that would make the final determination on what allegations to pursue, who to interview, and what the findings are. So now turning over to the discipline part, right? It's not just, the ordinance is not designed for myself nor the COB to have any sort of binding recommendations or input on the disciplinary process. The idea is for the discipline, once issued and once we're looped in on what the discipline was, is for us to opine on the sufficiency of the discipline, and then the department would respond to that. And again, that's just for purposes of transparency, consistency, and also something that can be part of a dialogue to take into account when future issues, or if future issues that are similarly related may happen. All of these are conversations that will likely be happening along the way as well. And that would be a product of the briefings that we have at the beginning, a briefing that we have at the end. But the discipline is a little bit different in that we're more so making a recommendation, even myself, kind of after the fact, because OPR or the police department, as it goes through its chain of command, are the ones that are kind of more in control of the process in the discipline aspect, and would be seeking a little bit less input from us on that part of the, as it relates to the discipline. So your recommendation is being made kind of more so after the fact, versus with the investigations, we're making recommendations along the way, either through those briefings or vis-a-vis me. I know that was long-winded, but does that kind of make sense to kind of show a little bit of the difference in why one aspect of the investigation is more involved and the discipline aspect of the investigation is not as much in our purview or our authority?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. The input along the way is significant. That's a huge piece of what the ordinance, authorizes you and the COB through you to do. And I think that's really valuable and important to explain to the public. And it does include what I was thinking of, which is the response. Like there is with regard to the recommendation on discipline, there is a requirement, I guess, and thanks for pointing that out, that, the police respond, which again, I totally understand and can easily explain that that's after the recommendation has been issued for discipline, which is in the purview of the police. And yet, the fact that the ordinance chose to give the COB the authority to comment on that, I think is also valuable, that the police have to say, okay, we've, taken the time to look at it, to read it, because that triggers the public aspect of the COB in a certain way, right? I mean, like, just, procedurally, I think it's important that that is included, that the police say, we hear you, and here's why we did what we did, or we agree or we don't agree, which is fine, and I think so. Thank you for the explanation. I think it makes sense. I think the process is a good one.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think just the key difference with discipline is that Chief Penn is the final decision maker as it pertains to discipline, and that was something that the framers, if you will, of the ordinance specifically did not want to disturb that. And when now in context to what Albert described earlier about the grievance process and all of that, you can imagine how much more complicated the process would be if we were trying to implement recommendations or changes before this grievance process is completed.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Anything else before we close this out? This portion of the conversation? Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome. Sorry that went on a lot longer than I think we probably thought it would, but I think it was a great discussion and a lot of great questions came out.
Yeah, I think it will be useful to just, we'll resend the investigation protocol with maybe some of this summative information before the next meeting, just so that the folks who aren't here, if they have questions, can follow along.
And I was going to say that I agree with what you said, that Julie, that, this in kind of a chart form. And we have charts that are kind of similar already that kind of lay this out, but having a way visually or to more easily articulate this, I think is very helpful to the public, because, we've been in this and training through this, and this was even helpful for us to have this conversation. So I imagine for the general public who may not, understand how our manifestation of a oversight board works, they may have whole different ideas about what we can, what we can't do, what we should and shouldn't do. So this was a real conversation, and hopefully we can reduce it in a way where the general public can get it in a very easy, understandable way.
Yeah, the diagrams that are in the MOU are useful from our kind of conversation developing, what's the workflow, what are the decision points, and who's involved with what. I think we might expand that so that there's a little bit more context, so that folks who, are interested in reviewing it or whatever can follow along. So I'll take a first cut at expanding those. And Charles, I'm gonna assume that you'll volunteer to be my reviewer, just to
volunteer. We're all friends here.
Excellent, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It may also be helpful to have someone who is not on the COB look at it and just make sure it makes sense to someone who doesn't have the context that you all have.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. Let's
Sounds
do
great.
budget.
Okay.
Next up.
Finally, I wanted to just make sure that we put FY25 budget on the agenda for this month, because as a county, we're gearing up for the budget cycle for fiscal year 2025. And so we're going to need to kind of put together some thoughts around what kind of budget we'd need for fiscal year 2025, and start preparing any sort of documentation or conversations that need to happen as we get ready to gear up for that process. Obviously, I am assuming that like Ian and I will kind of like lead in that work, but I would definitely welcome any members of the COB who are particularly interested in budget related conversations to join us in giving feedback, or give it to Julie and Gary so that they can relay that feedback to us. I just wanted to make sure that you all were cognizant that the process is, getting ready to get underway. And then if you have any ideas about wanting to expand your work or just additional resources that you all think you'll need to fulfill your work now that we're really kind of getting our gears going with getting operationalized. You don't have to necessarily have those ideas at the top of your head right now, but just wanted to make sure that you all were aware so that you can relay that information to us and we can incorporate that into our fiscal year 2025 ask. And then if there are any, I guess, requests or needs around how we can go about making sure that you all are aware of what that process is looking like and what numbers we're thinking might be appropriate for our fiscal year 2025 ask. I definitely welcome any feedback from you all about how you would like to be informed or looped in on that as well.
Thank you. Any questions about budget development? Cool. Yeah, the outreach update is pretty simple. David's gonna go to the Green Valley Civic Association event tomorrow, or Saturday, and just my calendar in my brain is very broken. And then we're gonna go attend their meeting kind of formally to walk them through the COB formation, activities, ongoing work, and get input.
When's the formal meeting?
On the 9th of October.
Oh, okay.
And that's their
Regular
quarterly
meeting
or
time.
monthly meeting.
Yeah, so we're just on their agenda. We had talked about being a lot of the civic associations don't meet over the summer. So in September, they were catching up. In October, they put us on their agenda. And when I say formal, I mean like officially participate and be on the agenda. But the goal is to be kind of candid and not like give a briefing deck that feels too officious, but to engage conversation. How much are people aware of the COB? How much do they understand about what we are and are not authorized to do and how our work functions and what the role of the IPA is and any areas of experience, interest, or kind of concern that they have so that we can bring that back to the group. And then Gary has reached out to several other civic associations in South Arlington. I think he was prioritizing Aurora Highlands for next in the queue because he had a connection there. But as we get a little bit more into these and hear what kind of feedback we're getting, we're hoping we can get someone to go, like a couple of people to go to different civic associations each month just to keep the conversation rolling.
They do also have sort of a civic association like council meeting that I believe happens monthly or quarterly. And it's a representative from every civic association comes to usually Bosman. And they have a similar commission that discuss. I'm not actually sure what they discuss, but I know that they have been calendared before. So I'll look up what their next meeting is. To see if we can.
I would love to go brief them so we can get, because part of the challenge has been the contact information on their civic association websites aren't always monitored.
Yeah, and there is a dedicated staff member in the county government who is the staff liaison for that board. So I'll find their information as well and send that to you all.
You're amazing, which I hope you already know.
Does anybody have a sense of what the event on Saturday is like?
It's like a family fun day from my understanding. So like food vendors.
I saw the brochure, but I mean, if I go there, I'm going to look to sort of talk to somebody.
Yeah.
But it's an informal thing. It's not like they're, they're not planning to do any presentation or anything. I'm just going to say, hey, here, participate, whatever you're doing, and that's it.
Yeah.
Show the flag.
Thank you.
Yeah, to my understanding, it's like a fall festival kind of thing.
Okay.
And it's at two different, I'm not sure how close the school and the community center are together, but I think it's like that sort of like block area that has been cordoned off for the event. So it's, I'm not sure if they'll have like a civic association booth, but that's probably your best bet.
Yeah. That's all we have programmed, except for open discussion. If there are any other,
I guess one last thing for engagement events, I have started calendaring different opportunities for engagement in the county. I know next month is Coffee with a Cop that ACPD is putting on. I think that's on the 3rd, so I think it's the first Wednesday of October. And there are 2 different times for that in 2 different locations. There's also the, Julie, what you mentioned on the 9th, the Civic Association meeting, and then there will be other events that I'll start calendaring on for the Outlook calendars. And in addition to that, if there's anything that we will be going to with 2 or more members, like the meeting on the 9th potentially, I will calendar that on our COB calendar or the website calendar, so that the members of the public would be able to see that as well. Just even if it's not meeting the standards of a public meeting, if there are only 2 members or only 1 member still, so that other members of the public will see our engagement opportunities. If they want to see us, they can come to one of those as well.
wonderful. Thank you for calendaring. That's very helpful. Our many circulating meetings and activities. I know a lot of people who've gone to Coffee with the Cop and enjoy going and hearing from Chief Penn. I've heard lots of positive feedback. I feel a little bit like we probably don't want to involve ourselves in their engagement, but if folks want to go, I would encourage that, just not maybe in the like wear a t-shirt and talk about the COB kind of way. So that's my personal sentiment, not my chair input.
Where are the t-shirts?
I don't know.
One's at one's on Wilson Boulevard, the other is
I
at
know the t-shirts.
oh, the t-shirt.
The other ones are usually in Shirlington, right?
Yeah, I cannot provide an update at this moment on that.
Mommy's on
I think she was asking me. I believe they're still in production, but I should have all of our community engagement materials by the end of the month. That was the due date that I gave the production company. So I'm not sure if they're going to start sending them like piece by piece or if they're waiting for everything to come at once, but we should have all of it before the end of the month. My goal was to get it in hand before the October community engagement.
Thank you for coordinating that. We appreciate you.
No problem. I hope y'all like them.
Yeah, of course we will. You made them. Anything else?
Just all the stuff.
Cool.
Ian and I did have, oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Please.
Oh, Ian and I did have the opportunity to take a tour of the jail facility.
Oh, right.
This past month. Very informative, especially in light of recent news. And the sheriff has extended that invitation to the board again. And I highly recommend my fellow commissioners take care of up on that. It's very helpful to get that kind of that full circle view of this process that we play a role into.
Thank you for the reminder, Charles. I was scheduled to go, but was unexpectedly out of town. So I will definitely sign up for the next opportunity. I think that's really valuable. And we appreciate your time going. All right.
Might be a good time to just throw in a plug to remind people to schedule their ride-alongs as well while we're at it.
Yes. Any issues, let me know, but the form is pretty intuitive. The ride-alongs?
No.
Oh, the form is in your email. I'll forward it. But you can put in your kind of 3 choice dates and you can say you want to do 3, you want to do 1, you want to do 2. So they're very responsive and helpful in facilitating that. But we've got to have 3 all done by the end of the year, December.
Can 2 people go at the same time? Like 2 board members?
I don't think so. Just logistically,
I think they only take 1 person at a time.
yeah.
You'd have to sit in the back seat.
Yeah,
that's
never mind.
Probably
Never
not.
mind.
Not
Yeah,
a protocol,
that's
but
kind of gross.
you could probably go on the same shift as somebody
Okay.
and chat about it. We can probably request that if you're interested. I'd be happy to do one with you. And then I think there are some outstanding training requirements, but we'll send an email so that folks get their specific input. Thank you, Mummy. Good reminder. Does Charles
No
have something else?
problem.
Charles,
Oh, got it.
Dave, I'm planning to attend the Green Valley Day on Saturday as well. So I'll text you to coordinate.
Okay,
I'm
great.
planning to bring Fatima, so make sure you have your uncle hat on.
You'll have what?
your
Her
uncle
daughter.
hat on, her
Oh.
daughter's coming in.
Well, that'd be great. Let's definitely coordinate.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for doing that. We appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I will hear a motion to adjourn since we did not get through all of our agenda items, if anyone.
I move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Wonderful. All right, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Captain Kim, Aaron, very nice to see you both. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank y'all.
Bye, Mummy.
Bye.